You're holding position. The situation is stable. Tonight's military sci-fi story moves carefully and quietly, perfect for sleep. I remember the temperature first. Not the numbers on the suit readout, but the way cold moves through layered fabric and finds the wet places you didn't know were wet. Under the jaw seal, at the wrists where sweat gathers, in the crease behind the knee. The cargo ring was a circle of dead industry, hanging above a planet that didn't matter anymore. We called it a ring because it used to spin and feed freight into orbit like a mouth that never closed. Now it wobbled. Sections still rotated. Sections were frozen. Whole arcs were open to vacuum, jagged like broken teeth. We entered through a maintenance collar that had been punched from the outside. The breach was old, edges blued and curled from heat. Someone had tried to cut in clean and failed. That told me two things. The place had been fought over, and the people who fought didn't care about keeping it usable. My suit lamp caught coolant mist drifting in slow sheets. It didn't fall. It floated. Gravity was present but unsure, changing with every groan of the structure. The mist glittered and made the air look thick, like you could scoop it with a hand. We were 6. Boarding salvage infantry, corridor trained. No banners, no speeches. We were there to find a black tag container listed in a dead manifest and confirm whether anything inside the ring was still active that shouldn't be. We weren't the first. We were the ones sent after the first team stopped answering. Comms went dead before we cleared the collar. The relay nodes in the ring had been ripped apart. Our squad line stayed on, tight beam suit to suit, but anything beyond 10 meters turned into static and cut screams. The jam wasn't deliberate. It was structural. Metal, ice, damage, and the ring's own systems bleeding noise. We moved slow, tethers out. Every man clipped to the next. That was doctrine in places where maps lied and gravity tried to throw you away. The new specialist was third in line. He'd been attached to us at the staging barge without explanation. The kind of transfer you don't get a choice about. He wore a borrowed exo frame over his suit industrial pattern, not pure combat. Thicker joints, heavier spine, lift-assist servos on the hips. It should have made him useful for moving a container if we found it. It also made him big, loud, and dependent on power. The acting squad lead disliked him before we crossed the hatch. I saw it in the way he didn't look back when giving hand signals, in the way he made the specialist carry the rear drone puck, even though it wasn't his role. Nobody said anything because words don't help in vacuum-adjacent places, and because there are some tensions you let sit until they poison the whole unit. The first corridor was a freight artery, wide enough for automated carts lined with rail grooves in the deck. The walls were ribbed with conduit and hardpoints for magnetic cranes. Every few meters, a side hatch led into storage bays, most of them sealed by frost, some bent inward like something had hit them from inside. Our boots crunched over ice crystals and old insulation foam. The sound traveled through our suits and into our skulls. It didn't echo the way sound should. It just existed, close and personal, like chewing. We kept lamps low. Light gives you depth, and depth in a place like that is mostly places to die. The lead marked a turn. We advanced toward the central transfer spine, where the manifest said the container should have been rerouted during the last emergency shift, if the manifest meant anything. Sometimes it's just a story the dead infrastructure tells itself. At 19 minutes in, the ring shifted. It wasn't a quake. It was a slow tilt and a sudden change in what down meant. My stomach floated up, then slammed back into my gut as the suit's compensators caught. The tether line went taut, then slack. The coolant mist rolled sideways like a wave finding a new shore. That's when the rear man vanished. He was 6th. A solid corridor trooper with a scar on his neck that looked like a wire burn. One step he was there, tether clipped, lamp beam steady. The next step, his line went slack, and his lamp cone snapped sideways and then went dark as if someone had pinched it. No shout came through comms, no impact sound, nothing. We stopped. The lead raised a fist. I turned, bringing my lamp around. The tether line had been cut clean, not frayed, not snapped, cut. The severed end floated in the mist, moving like a pale worm. The deck seam behind us looked the same as it had before. Two plates meeting, a hairline gap. But now the gap had a smear of black foam around it. Suit sealant. Fresh. A dragged mark across frost. We didn't have room to crouch and search properly. The corridor walls were studded with frozen conduit bundles that made every movement a snag hazard. The lead sent the point drone puck back, small disc, magnetic skates, short-range thermal and LiDAR. It clung to the deck and slid along the seam, its little status light blinking dull through fog. The drone came back with a broken feed. A single frame of something pale and jointed folded into the seam like a tool closing, then static. We looked at the seam. It looked back as a line of dark. We moved again. That's what we do. We mark the loss and keep moving, because stopping is how you lose the rest. At 32 minutes, we reached a junction where the freight artery split into three. A maintenance sign, half ripped away, named the branches in old coded terms. The central spine should have been the left branch, but the left branch was open to vacuum 50 meters down, a gash in the ring that breathed slow crystals into the corridor. You could see stars through it, sharp and indifferent. We took the middle branch. It sloped gently and the gravity stabilized for a while. My suit clock kept counting down oxygen. The numbers didn't scare me. They were just numbers. The fear came from what those numbers meant when the suit started to feel tight around the chest. The specialist's exoframe whined behind me. A thin, oscillating sound, like a high-pressure pump running dry. Every few seconds it clicked and the sound shifted pitch. He tried to damp it, adjusting his load bearing. It didn't help. The lead made a cutting motion with his hand, meaning silence, as if the frame could obey. We found the first body in a recess beside a conduit bundle. Not the rear man, someone else, one of the first team. His suit was cracked open across the abdomen, the seal torn like fabric. The inside had been scooped clean. There wasn't gore. There was absence. His ribs were white and neat. The lungs were gone. The vacuum had freeze-dried what was left. His helmet visor was frosted from the inside. A handprint on it, faint, the last thing he tried to do. We didn't stop to recover him. We tagged the location in the suit recorder. I didn't feel anything. I thought of the smell that should have been there and wasn't, and that's all. After that, the ring started to act like it was alive. Lights flickered in far compartments, not from power, from arcing, short circuits running through water and metal. In the fog, those flickers looked like movement. Sometimes it was just the mist catching the light. Sometimes it was something else. The second loss happened in a vertical shaft we had to cross. The corridor ended at a maintenance gap where a freight lift used to run. The lift platform was gone. The shaft walls were lined with ladder rungs and cable guides, all frosted. We had to traverse using the tether spool and magnetic boots, stepping across a dead gap while the ring's gravity stuttered. We staged it like a ritual, lead across, anchor line, second across, and so on. I went forth. When I reached the far side, I clipped in and looked back. The specialist was still on the near side, preparing, frame joints flexing with that whining sound. The third man was in the shaft, mid-crossing, when something moved beneath him. Not in the air, in the wall. A panel bulged, then split open like a mouth. Something pale and segmented unfolded out, fast, not like a creature but like a tool deploying. It wrapped his tether line, not his body. It hooked and reeled. He didn't scream. His suit might caught a short grunt as his body jerked sideways. His boots scraped the wall. His hands clawed at the line. The thing pulled him into the open panel. The panel closed. The tether line snapped tight, then went slack as it was severed inside. We fired into the wall. Rail carbine rounds punched shallow holes, sparks, fragments of ice. The panel stayed shut. The wall looked untouched except for our useless damage. The lead signaled stop firing. Ammunition was finite, so were ours. The specialist made it across last, heavier than the rest, frame motors straining. He hit the far deck with a jolt. His exo-frame knee actuator stuttered and locked for a half second, then released. He adjusted. The whining got louder. I could feel the lead's anger like heat through suit walls. It wasn't directed at the enemy. It was directed at the inconvenience of having a machine-shaped man in our line, making noise, slowing tempo, attracting attention even if we didn't want to admit it. We pushed into the central transfer spine through a hatch that had been manually overridden. The hatch swung on damaged hinges. Cold air spilled out, different from the corridor air, drier, stale. It smelled like scorched insulation through the suit filters, which meant there were still warm spots somewhere. The spine was narrower, a tube with handholds and maintenance alcoves running through the ring's thickness. In places, the tube opened into chambers where cargo used to be redistributed. Those chambers were now full of debris and frost, with occasional floating scraps that tapped gently against walls when gravity went thin. We found the container's tag in one of those chambers. Not the container itself, just the tag, an RFID plate bolted to a bracket ripped away. Someone had taken what we came for, or it had moved on its own. The lead stared at the empty bracket longer than needed. That was the moment the mission died. You could feel it. The objective had evaporated into other people's hands, and we were still inside a ring that was taking us apart. The specialist tried to access a nearby control panel. He was the only one with the diagnostic keys for old infrastructure. His gauntlet touched the panel. The panel lit for a second, then went dark. His exoframe power core surged, and the whining turned into a deep throbbing, like a heartbeat amplified. The sound traveled through metal. A second later, from somewhere deeper in the spine, came a response, a faint vibration, rhythmic, almost like a distant drill starting up. The specialist froze. He looked down at his frame's power pack, as if he could see the fault through armor plating. He made a small adjustment. The throb continued. The lead's gloved hand struck the specialist's shoulder plate. Not a strike for injury, just a hard contact, a command in a place without words. The specialist shut down the frame's assist motors. The whining dropped to a low hiss. He became slower immediately, burdened by the suit and the frame's dead weight. We moved. Slow moved slower. The third loss was not clean like the first two. It happened in a coolant service bay where the spine widened and exposed a bank of pipes running along the ceiling. The pipes were ruptured, bleeding mist. Visibility dropped to 2 meters. The deck was slick with ice. We tightened formation, tethers short, lamps angled low to catch movement through fog. A shape rose out of the mist at knee height, pale, jointed, with a cutting edge that glinted. It snapped at the lead's tether. The lead jerked back, boots skidding. I fired once. The rail round hit it. The thing didn't bleed. It sparked. A fragment snapped off and clattered to the deck, a piece of ceramic and metal. More shapes emerged, not charging, just appearing in the mist like tools pulled from a belt. We retreated into the spine. The bay narrowed behind us. The mist followed, creeping. The second man, now our rear, stumbled. His boot caught a cable guide. He fell. The tether line went taut. I felt it yank at my waist. I turned, pulled him, but he was already being dragged, not by a hand, but by a clamp that had lashed onto his suit's thigh plate. The clamp reeled him toward a service duct opening low in the wall. He fought, limbs scraping metal. His suit alarm blared in my ear as his seal scraped and abraded. He got one hand on the duct frame. His glove tore. Skin exposed for an instant before the clamp jerked again, and the hand vanished into the duct with the rest of him. I cut the tether. I did it without thought. Cutter bar snapped down, severing the line to keep the rest of us from being pulled with him. The severed end whipped my suit and left the mark in frost. The duct opening flexed as something inside pulled. The metal lip bent inward. The mist swallowed the sound. We backed away until the bay was behind us and the spine was clear again, as clear as that place ever got. Our suit clocks kept ticking. We were three then, the lead, me, and the specialist in the dead exoframe. The lead signaled toward the emergency clamp location, a maintenance escape on the ring's outer edge where a rescue tug could latch if anyone was listening. It was farther than our remaining oxygen buffer if we had to fight. It was closer than staying where we were. We left the mission behind. There was no container worth dying for after the ring had already taken more than half the unit. The ring started to rotate again as we moved deeper. Not a full spin, but a slow turn that changed the direction of gravity every few minutes. The effect was disorienting. One moment your boots were heavy and the next your stomach lifted as if you were falling upward. The coolant mist swirled, became a compass needle pointing at whatever down currently was. In one section, gravity went to near zero for long enough that debris began to float. Ice crystals drifted like dust motes. A broken tool spun slowly, its shadow turning over the wall like a clock hand. We used handholds, pulling ourselves along. The specialist struggled. The exoframe, without power assist, became a coffin he wore. He moved by dragging himself, frame joints stiff, catching on every protrusion. The lead looked back once, then stopped looking. A vibration ran through the spine again, closer now. Not constant, but pulsing, as if something was moving in bursts. We reached a transfer node where the spine connected to a rotating corridor that led toward the ring's outer edge. The corridor was a tube mounted on bearings, designed to maintain gravity orientation during ring shifts. It had failed. It rotated independently, slow and uneven, like a limb twitching after death. To pass, we had to time our movement with its rotation. When the tube aligned, gravity would briefly stabilize and we could cross into it. When it rotated away, you'd be left holding a frame or drifting into a gap. We waited in the node, pressed against cold bulkhead, watching the tube turn through a hatch window. The lead suit lamp caught something on the far side, a strip of fabric, floating, tethered to nothing. A torn suit liner. Fresh. That meant the first team's remnants were here too. When the tube aligned, we moved. The lead first, stepping into the rotating tube, boots magnetized, hands on rails. I followed, tether line between us. The specialist came last, frame scraping the hatch lip. It made a sound like grinding teeth. Halfway through the tube, gravity shifted. The tube rotated a fraction faster, as if a bearing had seized and released. My stomach lurched. My boots lost grip for a second, and then caught again with a jolt that sent pain through my knee. Ahead, the lead kept moving, steady, like he was made of iron. Behind, the specialist's frame snagged on a rail. He twisted, trying to free it. The frame's dead weight made him slow. His suit clock beeped a low warning tone, oxygen consumption spiking from exertion. The vibration pulse came again, so close it felt like it was inside my teeth. Something unfolded from the tube wall, not from a seam this time, but from a maintenance panel that had been designed to open. The panel snapped out. A cutter arm extended, pale ceramic blades rotating with a dry sound. It didn't strike at us directly. It struck at the tether line between me and the specialist. It was efficient. I reacted without thinking. I pulled the line toward me to change angle. The cutter missed, shaving a spark from the cable sheath. The line snapped back. The cutter arm extended again. I fired twice. Rail rounds punched the panel, shattering ceramic. The cutter arm jerked, blades wobbling, then continued extending anyway, now dragging broken pieces like teeth. The lead turned and fired past me, precise shots hitting the arm joint. The arm snapped and fell. It didn't fall down. It drifted, rotating slowly, blades still spinning on residual power like a severed limb twitching. We moved again, faster, because hesitation was now a kill mechanism. At the far end of the rotating tube, the corridor widened into an access chamber with a maintenance ladder leading down toward the outer edge. Down was relative. The ladder went into a vertical shaft that ended at the emergency clamp hatch. The clamp hatch was our exit. If the rescue tug was still in the area, if the clamp still had power, if anything still mattered, we descended. The ladder rungs were cold enough that my gloves stiffened. The shaft walls were lined with cable bundles and frost. The mist was thicker here, as if coolant had pooled in the shaft and never dispersed. Halfway down, the lead stopped. His suit lamp shone on something embedded in the wall, a nest of folded cutter limbs, dozens of them, stacked like tools in a rack. They were inactive, but their surfaces were slick and clean. This was where the ring stored its teeth. The vibration pulse became constant. The nest began to stir. Panels shifted. Limbs unfolded. The lead continued down. There was no other route. I followed, keeping my body close to the ladder, minimizing profile. The specialist came last, frame scraping the rungs. The sound was a beacon. As the specialist's frame passed the nest, the limbs activated, not all at once, in sequence, like a system booting. One arm extended and latched onto the frame's thigh brace. Another hooked the frame's spine. A third reached for the specialist's tether. The specialist fought, dragging himself down. His suit clock wailed a louder warning, oxygen dropping, exertion climbing. I cut my tether and dropped the spool end to free movement. Then I climbed back up 2 rungs, reached sideways, and slammed my cutter bar into the arm joint that held the frame. The bar bit. Sparks flew. The arm snapped and retracted, severed. Another limb snapped out and caught my wrist. The grip was not crushing. It was precise. It held me in place and began to pull toward the nest. I fired at point-blank range into the limb. The rail round punched through, blowing ceramic fragments into the mist. The limb released, but the impact spun me, boots losing magnet for a second. I caught myself on the rung with my left hand, fingers numb. The lead below didn't turn back again. He kept descending toward the hatch. His priority had become singular, exit. He was already out of the unit in his mind. That's how some survive. They amputate everything else. The specialist's frame was now being pulled sideways toward the nest. Multiple limbs latched and reeled. The specialist's body twisted inside the frame, suit scraping wall, seals grinding against frost. I moved down again, closer, because leaving him meant being alone, and being alone meant dying later instead of now. I didn't like him. That wasn't relevant. I reached him and jammed my cutter bar into the gap between frame and wall, using it as leverage. The bar groaned. The frame shifted. For a second, the pulling force eased. The specialist's suit lamp flashed across his own chest plate. His hands were shaking. He tried to restart the exo-frame assist. The frame's power core responded with a single deep throb and then a sickening silence. The core was done. The frame was dead weight. The limbs increased pull. The cutter edges began to rotate, not fast, but enough to bite into the frame's plating. Sparks and ceramic dust filled the shaft, mixing with coolant mist. I didn't aim for the limbs anymore. There were too many. I aimed for the nest's power trunk, a cable bundle feeding into the wall behind the panels. The bundle was thick, armored, but exposed where frost had cracked its sheath. I planted my boots on a rung, braced, and fired until the carbine's recoil dampers whined and my shoulder actuator complained. Rail rounds punched the cable bundle. The sheath shredded. The trunk sparked, then flared bright. For a second, the shaft was lit like daylight, harsh and white. The limbs froze, not because they were dead, but because their control signal dropped. Their grips loosened. The frame sagged. I grabbed the specialist's harness and hauled. My knee screamed inside the suit. I kept hauling because pain was just another number. We descended fast. The lead was already at the hatch, working the manual wheel. The emergency clamp hatch was sealed tight, frost welded. He cranked with both hands, shoulders shaking, suit servos straining. The wheel moved a fraction, then stopped. He cranked again. The frost creaked. Behind us, the nest began to reboot. The limbs twitched, panels shifted. The vibration pulse returned, stronger. The specialist and I hit the deck at the bottom of the shaft, boots finally on flat metal. The hatch was in front of us, a circular door with a red emergency clamp marking half obscured by ice. The lead got the wheel to turn. The hatch seal broke with a crack like bone. A hiss of slightly warmer air spilled out, smelling of old hydraulic fluid. The hatch opened into a narrow clamp corridor leading to the outer hull. We moved into it. The corridor was barely wide enough for two suits side by side. For an exoframe, it was a scrape. The specialist's frame shoulders jammed. He tried to angle. The frame caught. Metal squealed against metal. Behind us, from the shaft, came the sound of cutter limbs scraping down rungs. The lead pushed forward, not looking back. I pushed the specialist's frame from behind, using my shoulder to wedge it through. The frame scraped, shedding frost and paint. The specialist's suit clock screamed now, oxygen low. I felt my own suit pressure drop slightly. A micro leak from the earlier limb clamp. The suit compensated, but the cold that seeped in was sharper. We reached the clamp hatch at the end of the corridor. It was a flat panel with external latch points. On the other side was vacuum and the rescue tug's clamp arm, if it existed. The lead slapped the manual release. The panel didn't move. No power. He slammed it again. Nothing. He began to crank the emergency lever, a physical linkage that should have overridden the latch. The lever moved stiffly, ice in the mechanism. The cutter scraping sound grew closer behind us. The corridor vibrated. Frost dust drifted from the ceiling. I looked back. The shaft opening at the corridor entrance was filling with pale limbs, unfolding into the corridor like insects made of tools. They didn't rush. They advanced in measured increments, cutters rotating slowly, clamps opening and closing as if testing grip. The specialist tried to back up. His frame caught again. He was stuck in the corridor, half-turned, blocking it. The lead kept cranking the lever at the clamp hatch. His hands were steady now, almost calm, because he had chosen his task and nothing else existed. I fired down the corridor. Rail rounds shattered ceramic limbs, but more replaced them, stepping over broken pieces, advancing on their own dead parts without hesitation. My ammo counter dropped. My suit clock dropped. The corridor narrowed my world to a tunnel with an exit that wouldn't open. The specialist's frame started to emit a faint tone again, a dying harmonic from the power core, like a capacitor discharging. The tone drew the limb's attention. They adjusted, focusing on the frame. A cutter arm extended and bit into the frame's shoulder. Sparks flew. The specialist jerked. Another arm latched onto his waist brace. He didn't scream. His suit might transmitted a ragged exhale. That was all. I made a decision that didn't feel like one. I unclipped the specialist's frame harness from the corridor trooper harness point. The exoframe had quick-release bolts for emergency shedding. Industrial safety. I pulled the release. The frame's chest brace loosened. The specialist's suit shifted inside. He slid forward out of the frame, leaving it jammed in the corridor like a dead animal. He was smaller without it, able to crawl. The limbs immediately converged on the abandoned frame, clamps and cutters working with mechanical hunger, dragging it backward toward the shaft. The frame resisted, scraping, but the limbs were stronger as a group. The corridor cleared. The specialist crawled forward toward the lead in the clamp hatch, dragging himself with numb arms. His suit was scuffed and leaking a thin line of sealant foam from a hip plate. He moved anyway. The lead's lever finally gave. The clamp hatch shuddered. Ice cracked. The panel slid open a fraction, then jammed again. Vacuum hissed through the gap. Frost crystals erupted inward like breath. The lead shoved his fingers into the gap and pulled. The panel moved another centimeter, enough to see the black outside, speckled with stars. The rescue tug was there. Not close, but close enough. Its clamp arm was extended, locked onto the ring's outer latch. A thick cable ran from it to the hatch area. They had been waiting, or they had arrived late. It didn't matter. The lead hooked his tether to the cable and pushed through the hatch gap, forcing it wider with his body. Vacuum grabbed at him, pulling suit fabric tight. His boots scraped. He disappeared into black tether lines sliding after him. The specialist reached the hatch, hands fumbling for the cable. He clipped on. His suit clock flashed red. He had minutes. Behind us, the limbs finished dragging the abandoned frame away. The corridor entrance filled again with pale jointed shapes. They didn't need the frame now. They had 2 living suits in front of them. I fired once more. The rail round punched a limb and spun it. The rest advanced over it. My suit pressure dropped again. Micro leak widening. Cold flooded my right side. My fingers began to lose precision. I grabbed the cable and clipped in. The clamp hatch was open enough now to squeeze through. Vacuum tugged at my suit, trying to pull me out or tear me apart. I couldn't tell which. I shoved forward. A clamp limb latched onto my ankle. The grip was exact. It didn't crush. It held. It began to reel me backward. My body wedged in the hatch gap, half in vacuum, half in corridor. The cable tugged me outward. The limb tugged me inward. My suit groaned. The specialist ahead of me was already outside, hauling along the cable toward the tug. His movements were slow, exhausted. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. I reached down with my cutter bar and struck the limb gripping my ankle. The bar bit, sparks flaring in thin air. The limb didn't release. Its grip tightened by a fraction. The cutter edge rotated, trying to slice my boot seam. I struck again, this time at the limb's joint. The ceramic cracked. The limb jerked. The grip loosened enough for me to twist my ankle and pull free, leaving a strip of boot plating behind. I shoved through the hatch, body sliding into vacuum. The corridor behind me vanished into darkness as the hatch panel began to drift closed again, pulled by its own springs and the ring's failing mechanisms. For a moment, I hung outside the ring, tethered to a cable, with the cargo ring's broken curve stretching away on both sides. The planet below was a dull smear. Stars above were sharp. My suit alarm blared in my skull. Pressure low, temperature dropping, oxygen low. The alarms overlapped until they became one continuous sound. I pulled along the cable toward the rescue tug. Each movement was slow, like moving through thick liquid. My hands were numb. My knee felt distant, not painful anymore, just present as a malfunctioning hinge. Ahead, the specialist reached the tug's airlock. The hatch opened. A warm light spilled onto his suit. He vanished inside. The lead was already in, somewhere beyond, maybe alive, maybe not. I didn't know. The cable kept pulling me forward. Behind me, the clamp hatch on the ring finally sealed again. Through the small window in it, I saw pale limbs pressing against the inner glass, feeling, testing. They didn't look like faces. They looked like tools stored behind a transparent case. My suit clock hit a number that meant nothing by itself and everything in context. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next pull. I reached the tug's airlock and got one glove on the rim. Warm air hit my suit, fogging my visor from the outside with condensation that froze immediately at the edges. My other hand slipped. Fingers didn't obey. I tried again. The glove scraped. I caught. I pulled my body into the lock. The hatch began to close. The last thing I saw through the narrowing gap was my own glove print on the airlock rim, a smear of frost and grease. The hatch sealed. Pressure rose. The suit alarms softened, then stopped one by one. I sat against the airlock wall. My hands shook. Not from fear. From chemical debt, muscle fatigue, and the cold leaving slowly, like it didn't want to let go. On the inner hatch, frost formed a thin layer, and in it, the glove print remained for a while. 5 fingers, blurred at the edges. Then the lock heaters kicked in, and the print began to disappear, erased by meltwater that ran in thin lines down the metal. That was the last clear image I kept. The rest is suit recorder data, an account of who didn't come back, numbers that don't fit in any manifest. The end. The narrative powers down completely. Everything essential stays on, everything else fades away. You're safe to sleep now.